Hey, what's up everyone? It's Duncan from overlandjournals.com and welcome to my Overlanding for Beginners series. You might be wondering what am I doing with a belt? Well, stick around, I'll tell you about it. Welcome back, and if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. My channel is all about sharing my experiences in overlanding or off-road touring with the wider community. In case if you missed my previous videos in this Overlanding for Beginners series, I'll leave a link above to the playlist as well as in the description below. Go check them out. I'm sure you'll find them useful. Now, when I'm off-road touring, apart from taking in the sights and getting all the experiences, and enjoying the driving itself, love driving my 4x4, my 80 series. Something else I really enjoy doing is meeting the locals and meeting fellow travelers, and that forms a greater part of my experience. And I'll share with you today why you should meet with the locals and other fellow travelers. Now, at the trip planning stage, whether I'm doing a long trip or a short trip, it doesn't matter. Something I love doing is gathering information about the history, places of interest, along the way, as well as places I would visit, and that forms part of the great experience that I have. But no matter how much of research I may do, nothing compares to getting local information. Local knowledge is always gold, I say. So that's one of the reasons why I always make it a point to meet the locals, and they got the inside track. They know the best pub in town. They know the secret locations that's not necessarily on the internet or on printed magazines, and that you should go and visit and experience for yourself. And sometimes if you make friends with the locals, they might let you into places which the general public don't necessarily have access to. So always meeting the locals for me is very important. And if you get to know the locals a little bit better, apart from giving you all that information that's very useful to you, what I also found that they sometimes open up and let you into their own lives and their stories, and what their lives have been like, and so on. And I find that makes it so much more enriching, and it's all part of the great experience that I have in my traveling. So how do you get to meet the locals? Some of you may wonder. Well, there are places where in small towns, small communities, the locals sort of congregate. Here in Australia, one of the best places, in fact the best place to meet locals, is go to the local pub. Now, don't expect them to come over and make friends with you or start up a conversation with you. You got to make the effort, as the traveler. That's what I do. I try and make the effort. And one thing I've always found, whether it's here in Australia or even back in Africa, locals are very welcoming. They love to get to know travelers, but as I said, we have to make the first approach and then start up a conversation. I'll share with you one of my experiences from one of my recent trips. 2 years ago, we had just crossed the Simpson Desert and got into the town of Birdsville, and as always, walked into the pub, wanted a cold beer and also an opportunity to meet others. So walked into the Birdsville Hotel and had a couple of beers, met up with a number of other locals and travelers, but one in particular, had started chatting with him, and turned out that he's a retired cattle drover. He used to basically drive herds of cattle along with other drovers from Birdsville, which used to be a cattle trading post at one time. And they would drive these cattle on horseback to as far as Adelaide, which is about 1,000 odd kilometers. And this was the days before motorized transportation came to being. So these drovers would drive them, and he had a lot to just tell me about the experiences they had, how difficult at times it was to get these cattle across, because once at the trading post someone came along and bought that cattle, then it was the duty or the job of these drovers to take these cattle across to the point where the seller wants them taken, or take to the market or whatever. So it was their job at that point in time. He's now retired. I think he was in his late 70s or early 80s. I can't remember exactly, but he was a really wonderful man. And I think we had a chat for about a good 2 to 3 hours, bought him a couple of beers, we had this chat, he told me a whole heap of stories about his past life and what he does now. And then eventually it was time to leave, he pulled out this belt, and this is where the belt comes into this story. So he pulls out this belt from his bag and he gives it to me. Being retired, what he does is he gets cattle hide and he makes belts. He says he sells it and makes a little bit of money on the side. But he presented this to me. He didn't want any money. I did want to pay him for it, but he didn't want to take any money. He said he was so nice enough to come over, have a chat with me, buy me a couple of beers. So this is my token of appreciation and something for you to remember me with. That's what he said to me. So I've got this belt. I don't wear it because it's very sentimental. And if you look closely, I'm not too sure whether the camera will pick it up. It says Birdsville. I'm not sure whether the camera picks it up, but it says Birdsville, and he's handcrafted these belts. So yeah, so that's one of my experiences. So meeting the locals for me it's a wonderful, amazing part of my travels. Apart from meeting the locals, also try and make time to meet with other travelers. Now, from over the years, in my experience, I've also found that not every traveler is out there to take in the sights. Some of them travel for various other reasons. This reminds me of, out of many, but two particular examples which I'd like to share with you. And one was a lone traveler who I met back in Africa, and another was a family that was traveling here in Australia. And I'll start with the lone traveler. My wife and I, we were doing an outback trip back in Africa. This was about 10 years ago. And we met this gentleman, I think he was from France or somewhere in Europe, and he had come down to Africa and he was doing this outback trip on a bicycle. Now, I personally would not have the energy to do it on a bicycle, but he was doing it on a bicycle. And he was staying at one of the campsites where we were staying, so we sort of started up a conversation. He was pretty much on the next campsite to where we were. And apart from enjoying the environment and seeing Africa, his primary reason for doing this all by himself, he said to me, was to get rid of certain fears he has had in his life. And one of the biggest fears was that he always had to depend on someone or sort of lean on someone to get things done, or to get himself that encouragement or that support. And he had wanted to break away from that. So what he decided was to do this trip where he was on his own. He was well prepared, so he was not some fool trying to do the outback completely unprepared. He was very well prepared. So he had done his research on a bicycle. So that loneliness and being isolated and not having support, he said that helped him to overcome those fears and become a stronger person. Next was a young couple here in Australia. That was a year ago when we did an outback, long extended outback trip. We met this young couple with a 3-year-old son, and they were traveling Australia for 18 months. How cool is that? And when we got to know them and started having a conversation with them, they said they wanted their child to see Australia, what it was all about, and for themselves as well. So they wanted to experience Australia as a family unit. So what they did was the wife quit her job. He had a business. He sold his business and then got on the road for 18 months. They were not too sure whether they would end in 18 months. I still follow them on Instagram. But what they were doing was super awesome, and it was very inspiring to me as well. So their reason was to show their child what Australia was all about, and also to spend time together as a family. I mean, 18 months on the road together, that's a serious amount of bonding that you're doing. Apart from inspiring stories, I've also found that Outback can be a very harsh country, and we live in the cities and we have all the luxuries we can think of, and we're very fortunate. And these folks out there in the Outback, the remote communities, they go through a lot of difficulties and tough times. But the inspiring part to me is their tenacity and how resilient they are, and how they come together as a community. How they stick together. In the cities, sometimes we don't even know our neighbors, and yet you go to these little communities and you see the values and the togetherness they have, and how they have that spirit of being able to overcome just about any adversity that gets thrown at them. So to me, it's very inspiring. It gives me an insight to their lives. and also it kind of gives me that encouragement and that strength sometimes I look for when I have challenges in my own life. So when you travel next time, my encouragement to you is meet the locals and meet the other fellow travelers, get to know them a little bit better, and you'd be amazed. Apart from getting all that experience which I just talked about, you'd make some really wonderful friends. I have a few friends that I've, over the last few years of traveling here in Australia, I've already made in the most unlikeliest of places. And if I do ever go back to those places, which I probably will down the track, I have friends. And how cool is that? So I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful as part of my beginner series. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, if you're new to this channel, please do subscribe. I'm all about sharing my experiences with the wider overlanding or off-road touring community. And I thank you for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in my next video.